From the assassination of John F. Kennedy to the recent disappearance of that Malaysian airliner, any story with an element of mystery is bound to raise questions and prompt theories. That's now the case with the manhunt for marathon bombing suspects Tamerlan and Jahar Tsarnaev. Investigative journalist Russ produces the WhoWhatWhy website. In his recent post, he raises questions about claims by the man who goes by Danny regarding the night he was carjacked, allegedly by the Tsarnaevs. Welcome back to Greater Boston, Russ.
Thank you, Emily. Good to be here.
Yeah, in interest of full disclosure, I'd say we've worked together in the past, so I know your work. I'm familiar with it. Having said that, though, I have to say that a lot of good journalists in this city, this is a particularly sensitive story to them, as you can imagine, including some in this building, and have looked at this timeline and some of the questions about Danny and don't have the same problem with the narrative that you do. So just to start it, what is your basic problem with it?
This is after many, many months of studying again and again and again to see if we were imagining something. And essentially what our team found was that this unknown person, and this is very important to explain that this Danny, and that's not his real name, no. His identity has been shielded from the public. It's very unusual. And he is a key witness in this whole story because he is the person who says that Tamerlan Tsarnaev, who is now dead, confessed to him that he had been behind the Boston bombing and the killing of the officer at MIT, Officer Sean Collier. Now, the younger brother, who is still alive, has pled innocent to all of this. So this makes Danny very, very important. And yet, if there is some kind of a plea deal with the younger brother, Danny's story will stand and he will never have to identify himself or go on the stand. So we're very, very interested in his story about the carjacking. And what we found as we studied it were multiple versions that he provided. And they range tremendously from how long the carjacking took to whether he was carjacked at all to the circumstances under which he escaped.
I don't want to interrupt you, but let's take a look at it, though, because I want to break it down a little bit systematically, because you do it on your website, and we can refer people to that afterwards. But let's take it at the first one, which is where the carjacking actually took place. So there was a press release that came out by the Middlesex District Attorney's Office that said the carjacking took place at 3rd Street in Cambridge. But actually, it was on Brighton Avenue in Alston. Now, I've talked to police and authorities over there, in fact, including someone today. They've acknowledged that that's not right. So there's really no mystery that the carjacking took place in Alston, not in Cambridge. And that press release, by the way, had a number of errors in it, but it came out right after. I mean, there was the incident that Friday night, and that thing came out the next morning, very, very early.
We'll have more to say about that particular item. I'm not so sure that that was an accident, but I'm happy to talk about that after our next article comes out.
That it was an accident, that they said it was Cambridge and not Alston?
There are many, many other interesting elements, including the original story about a robbery at a convenience store.
Which it turned out, we looked into that. Turns out they were unrelated. But there was a report of one, but it was unrelated, both the shooting of Sean Collier and to
our article is really about the carjacking itself, and so that's really, I think, in our limited time here, what I'd like to focus on. But I'm happy to go back.
Well, let's
and
look at the next one,
things.
which is a really critical point in yours. This has to do with the length of time that Danny was held hostage, carjacked. So one report, various media reports had 90 minutes. Another had 30 minutes, and the Associated Press, another had just a few minutes. Once again, if you look at that press release, the Middlesex DA's office was the first one that came up with the 30 minutes, and they didn't put those words into Danny's mouth. They just said it was 30 minutes. They didn't say, according to the man who claims he was carjacked, it was 30 minutes. They didn't say that. They just put it out there.
I think what's significant is right from the beginning, it was clear that this individual, if he was carjacked at a particular time, and that he was released at a particular time because he supposedly ran right across the street from the Shell station, and within minutes, law enforcement was there. It is a big screw-up to add an extra hour or subtract an extra hour from something like that. That's very substantial. But again, that is not the main point. I mean, to us, and I hope I'm not jumping the gun here, but to us, the most important thing is that in one version, and some of these are, by the way, are coming from Danny himself, there are different accounts of how long as I say, how he escaped, and in fact, whether he escaped at all, in fact, whether he was even carjacked at all. And if you look at certain accounts, they actually say that they took the car and they released him immediately and that he was never held as a hostage.
That's one person reported that, but that doesn't appear to bear out by the timeline.
Well, the key point for us is this. We have two different interviews with Danny.
You didn't get an interview.
No. These are media interviews, and on WhoWhatWhy.com, people can go and they can click and they can watch these things, read the transcripts and so forth. In early accounts, the story was that he had either they had just taken his car and driven away with it, or they had taken him hostage, and that they had gone to a gas station, and that when they got to the gas station, both brothers left the car. One went inside to pay, one went out to pump gas, and that Danny opened the door and left the car. Now, that's very different from what we heard as the final version, which only gelled maybe 10 days later, which was that, in fact, Danny was sitting in the car next to Tamerlan Tsarnaev, who had a gun, who put it down for a second, and that he escaped. And that's a huge difference.
We actually did do a graphic on that one, so I want to just put it up to make it clear for our audience. So there's three kind of different versions, that he was released after just a couple of minutes and never really carjacked. He escaped when one of them got out of the car and then somebody else got out of the car and he ran. Or he escaped with Tamerlan was fooling around with a GPS in the front seat and he reached for him, but he got away and ran really fast. Can't some of this, Russ, be tacked up to the fact that this guy was nervous, he was scared. He said that in those interviews. He was terrified. He was afraid for his life, as anyone would be who would, somebody came up to them with a gun to their head or, gunpoint at any rate. And the timeline itself, you may think that something could go 45 minutes to an hour that was really only 12 minutes because it was such a significant chunk of your life.
We can give him the benefit of the doubt on certain things, but we can't give it to him on everything. There are too many anomalies here. And I think a lot of it goes back to the fact that we know that the FBI had a prior relationship with the Tsarnaevs. They don't seem to want to talk about it. Another key person in the story, Ibrahim Todashev, down in Florida, was shot and killed by the FBI under very strange circumstances. And we will have another story coming out about that.
This is the angle you should be pursuing.
Well, no, but
Danny is going to be called to testify at trial.
I don't think he will.
And he has said he will.
But
he has said he will.
Yes, but I don't think he will, and I'll tell you why. Because if the defense counsel for Johar Tsarnaev, what they typically do is they try to get a lesser, the government says they want the death penalty. In order to avoid that, they would try to convince him to plead to some sort of lesser charge, in which case you would not have a trial.
That's not going to happen.
Well, we don't know that. No, we don't know that. That has happened in many, many cases.
I don't think it's going to happen in this case.
Let me tell you something. If this man goes on the stand, he's going to have problems, because the fact of the matter is what he said, which is very significant, in one interview with WMUR, which is a television station in this general area, ABC affiliate, they interviewed him, and he told them that he was alone in the car when he left and took off. Now, he later, some days later, when he was interviewed by NBC and CBS, he told them that Tamerlan Tsarnaev was sitting next to him in the car, put the gun down for a second, and he bolted.
Well, are you suggesting that this character, Danny, is somehow involved in this, that he's part of this, that he's involved with the Tsarnaevs? I mean, what would be his motive to screw up, to contradict himself, other than, sometimes facts become more clear after a few days, sometimes they get
right. I think it's important for investigative journalists and for all of us to be skeptical of official accounts, whether it's by government or by corporations or by unions or anybody else. Those institutions are out to protect themselves. The FBI has a long history of controversy and problems. I don't need to tell that to a Bostonian. And I think we have every responsibility to scrutinize these official stories carefully, particularly when there is a rush to judgment, and within days they always tell us we've resolved the whole thing, there's nothing else to investigate.
I mean, one odd part of this was that Danny's story was managed in a sense. It was everybody in this area knows Jamie Foxx. He's a prominent criminologist at Northeastern University, and he, through other connections, knew who Danny was, and he kind of managed out these interviews with these various journalists. That's unusual in itself, because normally as you point out, we would all somehow figure out who this character was and be able to get to him, and there'd be some massive press conference, and we would just hear the story, and that would be the end of it. But it didn't go down that way. But you seemed a little miffed, though, that you couldn't get an interview.
Well,
with him.
I think here's the key thing. This Danny is an immigrant. He has
and
delicate...
we don't know his status, that's true.
Right, right. And by the way, there's another person who is the man at the service station who allegedly received Danny when he ran across the street. Now, Jamie Foxx is the man you have to go through to get to Danny, and Jamie Foxx became the man you had to go through to talk to this service station attendant. In fact, on our website, WhoWhatWhy, you can actually watch an interview on CNN, and there is the service station attendant, and there's Jamie Foxx standing next to him. Now, I don't know what his role is. If he's not a lawyer, is he representing these people? Why is he controlling access to these people? It's very peculiar.
Well, he knew him through another professor at Northeastern. I said it's very unusual, but he knew who the guy was, and he had confided in him, and I guess he was parsing out these interviews, or parceling them out according to various news organizations' credibility and who might be willing to tell the story.
Another character in this is John Miller, then of CBS, who goes in and out of law enforcement all the time. John Miller worked in journalism, then he worked for the police, then he worked for journalism, then he worked for the FBI, then he worked in journalism, and he stage managed a lot of this story, including this very strange story that Johar, when after 100 shots were fired into that boat, he somehow struggled to his knees when he was all bloody and scrawled a confession on the wall of the boat. He then left journalism again, John Miller.
And we've seen pictures of that, though.
He now...
Russ, we've seen pictures of the...
You've seen pictures of something.
Yeah, you don't believe that...
Well, no,
he wasn't on that bloody
It's not that I do or don't believe.
He walked of his own volition out of that boat, stood up and walked out. I mean...
Well, let me tell you something. The point is this, is that as a journalist, it's my job to represent the public interest and to be skeptical of things and to look at facts. That's really it.
That's what we're doing here with you. All right. Appreciate your coming. Russ Baker, as always.